Сегодня мы продолжаем серию выпусков КИСИ Podcast, посвященных международной оценке конституционной реформы в Казахстане. И мы пригласили партнеров КИСИ из Китая, США, стран Европейского Союза для того, чтобы обсудить не только институциональные аспекты предстоящей реформы, но и то, как она меняет международное восприятие Казахстана. Жандос Нурланович, человекоцентричность, экологическая ответственность, приоритет науки и инноваций, все это вписано сегодня и в преамбуле, и в ключевые статьи Конституции. Как вы считаете, ведь это влияет, да, на восприятие Казахстана как ответственного международного партнера, институционально зрелое государство?
Безусловно, все те новеллы, которые предусмотрены в новой Конституции, они внимательно изучаются нашими международными партнерами. Конечно, в первую очередь, это конституционная реформа нацелена на то, чтобы на наши внутренние потребности. Любая внутренняя реформа, она имеет и внешние измерения. Как мы видим сейчас, и в ходе обсуждения, мы уже записываем сегодня с вами 3-й подкаст, возникает много вопросов и ответов в то же время со стороны наших зарубежных коллег. Я вижу, что идет большой интерес со стороны наших международных партнеров. Ну, понятно почему, поскольку эта реформа, ее оценивают не только политические как заявления, но и институциональные механизмы. Для, допустим, инвесторов зарубежных важна наша предсказуемость и то, как мы соблюдаем правила игры, то есть верховенство права. Для наших региональных партнеров нужны устойчивость и способность к долгосрочному сотрудничеству. А в целом для глобального сообщества важна наша ценностная ориентация и соответствие современным вызовам, таким как зеленая повестка, климат, устойчивое развитие и, конечно же, технологическая трансформация, которая сейчас стоит в повестке у всех стран. Все эти вопросы мы учли в проекте новой Конституции, и мы постараемся взглянуть на этот документ именно в более широком контексте, как на инструмент укрепления субъектности Казахстана, его доверия и стратегической позиции в мире.
Одна из самых обсуждаемых норм – это норма о приоритете национального законодательства, о том, что международные договора теперь будут приниматься посредством законов и будут рассматриваться в обязательном порядке парламентом, что, безусловно, усиливает парламентскую влиятельность парламента, согласно предложенной президентом формуле «сильный президент, влиятельный парламент, подотчетное правительство». Однако эта норма вызывает также множество дискуссий. Не означает ли это отказ Казахстана от своих международных обязательств? И мы пригласили, чтобы обсудить этот вопрос, эксперта США, активного участника мероприятий, проводимых КИСИ, Астана форума Джошуа Линкольна.
Да, я думаю, будет очень правильно задать вопрос. Опять же, мы задавали его в рамках первого выпуска по балансу между международным и нашим национальным правом. То есть, как вы помните, сейчас в рамках новой Конституции предусматривается следующее такое. Никто не отказывается от наших обязательств, принятых страной в рамках международного права, но несколько меняется сама правоприменительная практика. Теперь для того, чтобы нормы международного права вступили в силу, они должны быть ратифицированы нашим парламентом. И в случае принятия на республиканском референдуме 15 марта, это уже будет Курултай. То есть любая норма международного права для того, чтобы заработала в Казахстане, должна быть ратифицирована уже Курултаем. И это общепризнанная такая практика, которая действует не только в Казахстане. И сегодня мы бы хотели спросить одного из наших американских коллег, как эта практика воспринимается за рубежом. Перейдем на английский. And our guest today is Джошуа Линкольн, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for International Law and Governance at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University. Joshua, welcome to the КИСИ Podcast. It is a great pleasure to have you with us again. Let me begin with the central question. The draft new constitution of Kazakhstan emphasizes the primacy of national law and provides the international treaties take effect only after parliamentary ratification. From a comparative legal perspective, how is the relationship between national and international law usually structured in different legal systems? And what key principles matter most in this context?
This is always a very, very interesting question, and I think it's one that becomes increasingly relevant. I think I was reading to I think just the news came this morning that the referendum for the Constitution will happen about a month from now. So I imagine these questions are very, especially amongst legal scholars back in Kazakhstan and out here, are very relevant and receiving a lot of attention. When across legal systems, this question about the relationship between international treaties, international law, and how it's dealt with in domestic law and domestic political structures, you usually find one of two models. So one model is often described as the monist model, and those systems, international law, especially treaties, can become a part of domestic law automatically or with a very little bit of procedural work. And these, and then only with minimal steps, then national courts may apply treaties directly, and international obligations are very close to constitutional norms. This is sort of, I think, the standard in many European legal systems, for example. The other model that one finds is the dualist model. And here, international law and domestic law are treated as sort of separate orders, and a little more work goes into how they are brought together. And treaties bind the state at the international level, but they only take effect domestically after a deliberate legislative process or some review or interpretation, parliamentary ratification, or they require legislation to implement. So this approach is found more frequently in common law systems and in systems in parliamentary systems that emphasize the sovereignty of the parliament itself. So I think it's important to say that from a comparative perspective, there's not one right model and one wrong model, one more sovereign model or anything like that. These are just different approaches. And what matters most in the path that is chosen, and I think your question presupposes the fact that in the new 2026 draft constitution, there is a process for how international law and treaties are brought into the domestic system, and it involves multiple actors. It involves the executive, it involves the constitutional court's review, and it involves the Kurultai, the new one single chamber parliament. And so I think there are two underlying principles that usually are seen to be very important. The first is clarity. It doesn't matter which choice you make, but you need to make your choice clearly. This is the idea here, because legal uncertainty is what creates problems for courts, for investors, for citizens. So how international obligations enter domestic law and in what precise form is important, and that is sort of clearly dealt with in the 2026 draft. I think the second important principle is democratic accountability, which is if the system requires parliamentary ratification, then that is actually a plus, because that's not an undermining of international law or treaties. It is a more explicit way in which the country and its institutions take ownership and accountability for treaties or for international law. So most modern constitutions are really trying to reconcile this sovereignty of the country with international cooperation, even as they identify that as a permanent condition of their statehood. They want to say very clearly, look, we are a state that believes in international law. We implement international treaties and turn them into domestic law, but we need to do this process with clarity and with democratic accountability in order for everybody to understand what it is that we are doing. So if we could look at different countries, whether it's Germany, where treaties are integrated into domestic law but filtered through constitutional review, or the UK, which is in that example of parliamentary incorporation system, you would see the range of options that are available here. So the bottom line is the constitutional framework needs to create a predictable, credible, a good faith bridge between international obligations and domestic law. It is, I think, probably not correct to think of this draft, because it makes that process more explicit, more detailed, and has more steps than the 95 Constitution. It would not be correct to interpret that as a withdrawal from international law or from commitments to treaties. I think, if anything, it can be seen as a commitment to a more serious incorporation of that into domestic legal and political processes.
Joshua, thank you very much for your clear explanation. And as we see now, as you noted, there is no single correct model. What matters most is clarity and accountability. In this sense, the reform strengthens the link between international obligations and domestic law, making the system more predictable in the future. We will return to you shortly with another question on the international dimension.
Ну, если мы в первом блоке поговорили о соотношении национального и международного права, то теперь хотелось бы перейти к, собственно, тому, как политическая модернизация, как обновление институциональной архитектуры нашего государства влияет на внешнеполитическое позиционирование, или, проще говоря, имидж страны на международном пространстве, в международном пространстве. Вот, Жандос Шаймарданович, мы говорим о том, что новая Конституция знаменует фазу перехода к зрелой государственности. Вот как это влияет на восприятие Казахстана как устойчивого, предсказуемого партнера и международного актора? Мы пригласили сюда наших коллег из ЕС. Предлагаем поговорить об этом.
Давайте спросим их. And to explore these questions, we are joined today by Альберто Туркстра, international relations expert and analyst specializing in Central Asia. He has been closely following Kazakhstan's reform trajectory and has observed its institutional transformation from both a regional and European perspective. Альберто, welcome to the КИСИ Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Let me begin with a broader strategic question. In your view, how does Kazakhstan's constitutional modernization affect its positioning between the European Union, Russia, and China?
Well, thank you very much for having me today. I've been following the reform process of Kazakhstan for a number of years now. I've been to Astana on a number of occasions for presidential and for parliamentary elections. So the way I see it now, Kazakhstan is in its second major phase of state reform. The first phase was, of course, the first 3 decades of independence, in which you were building from scratch your institutions, you were, achieving your territorial integrity, sovereignty, you were achieving your place among the community of nations, interethnic harmony was achieved. So this took the better part of the first 3 decades of independence. And now we find ourselves in the second major phase of state reforms, which has taken the better part of the presidency of Mr. Tokayev. And this is about the institutions, the quality of the institutions and the resilience of the institutions. And I think the constitutional referendum that we will see on 15 March and the new constitution that will be put to a vote is the culmination of this major second wave of state building. That is more in tune with the times we are living in. This constitution reflects, of course, the new social realities of Kazakhstan, and of course the new changing and challenging international environment. Of course, from the European Union, of course, we are looking with great interest to this process. I know that Kazakhstan has put great efforts in learning the best practices from other countries around the world. When changing its constitution, you have engaged with bodies such as the Council of Europe very intensively, and its relevant bodies such as the Venice Commission to improve your electoral code and others. So I think this is the culmination of a process that has been taking part since President Tokayev acceded to the presidency in 2019, and it is to make the country future-proof, ready for the next generations, more responsive to the needs of its citizens, and more accountable in a sense to its citizens. The constitution is not a museum relic. It is a living document. It is a social contract where citizens and the state each know their rights and their responsibilities. And I think this document reflects this.
Thank you, Alberto. And one more question for you. Let me add another important dimension. In your view, to what extent does internal institutional modernization, including the ongoing constitutional reform, strengthen trust in Kazakhstan as a reliable international partner in the Eurasian space.
Yes, thank you very much. I've been looking with great interest to some of the proposed changes in the institutional setup of the country. As I said, one of the main priorities of the new constitution is to have a clear differentiation of the three branches of power, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch, and to avoid undue interference between the three of them. Of course, the legislative part, we have heard that there will be a change from bicameral to unicameral, so the Senate will be removed. Of course, this is not unique. Other countries have done so quite successfully. Think of Denmark and Sweden. New Zealand have also moved from bicameral to unicameral. And in this new unicameral setup, all the seats will be directly elected. So there will be no more artificial quotas, which perhaps the president had in the past to appoint senators. So all the seats will be directly elected, and the political parties will acquire an even more relevant role in the political life of Kazakhstan, not only during the elections, but the day-to-day life. We expect that political parties will become the main actors. Of course, there's other measures. There's the introduction of the figure of a vice president in the new constitution. This, of course, is also to avoid any power vacuums during periods of transition, and also giving a signal to foreign investors that there will be no major changes in the institutional setup during periods of leadership transition. And there's other, of course, interesting elements in there that we can talk about.
Alberto, thank you very much for your valuable insights, and your analysis shows that constitutional reform is not just a domestic change. It sends a strategic signal, increasing predictability and trust among international partners. Thank you again for joining us today.
Мы обсудили, как воспринимается конституционная реформа нашими западными партнерами в США, Европейском Союзе. Но не менее важное измерение — это наши коллеги из Китая, которые являются постоянными участниками нашего подкаста. И, как говорится, немало параллелей проводится между Казахстан Халық и Народным советом Китая. Ну и мы решили обратиться к эксперту, китайскому эксперту, который мог бы дать нам более полное видение того, какой видится конституционная реформа, вот изменение институциональное именно из Китая. Какие параллели можно провести между нашими политическими системами, что немаловажно.
Вы абсолютно правы. Я думаю, будет очень актуальным спросить наших китайских коллег. Давайте обратимся к нему. To discuss this regional and comparative dimension, we are joined today by Ван Хуа, Deputy Director of the Center for Eurasian Studies at Tufts University. Professor Wang, welcome to the КИСИ Podcast, and we are very pleased to have you with us. Let me begin with the institutional dimension. What is your view on the establishment of a unicameral parliamentary structure, the Kurultai, in the context of Kazakhstan's political system development? And do you see this transition from a bicameral to a unicameral parliament as strengthening checks and balances, enhancing political party institutionalization, and improving governance efficiency?
I think the establishment of unicameral parliament, you call Kurultai, right, is of great significance in the development of Kazakhstan's political system, with its core reforms reflecting clear governance logic. First, it simplifies the structure, merging the upper and lower houses into a 145-member unicameral parliament, and abolishing the coordination link between the two houses has greatly shortened the legislative circle. And second, it enhances representativeness. The proportional representation system promotes the maturity of party politics, reduces personalized politics, enables the parliament to better reflect the diversified social demands and affirms an effective oversight of presidential power. Third, it clarifies powers and responsibilities, defining the parliament's personal power in institutions such as constitutional court and audit office, has raised the legislative body's ability to check and balance the executive and judicial branches, confirming the modern legislative principles of parliamentary sovereignty. So this institutional development also embodies dual values. On the one hand, it balances efficiency and equity, as a unicameral system avoids the deliberation without decision-making of the bicameral system. And the proportional representation system guarantees the voices of minority groups, which is consistent with the governance balance logic of efficient decision-making plus extensive consultation in China's democratic centralism. On the other hand, it enhances institutional adaptability, as in response to Kazakhstan's national condition of vast territory and ethnic diversity. The unicameral system facilitates the overall planning of national interests while retraining the majoritarian representation system in local parliaments to balance central and local powers, which is in line with the universal experience of governance in a unitary state. Yes.
Thank you. And let me move to another important institutional innovation. Do you see any parallels between the People's Council of Kazakhstan, the new institution, and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference?
Yeah, there are some, similarities between the People's Council of Kazakhstan and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. Their common ground lies in the institutional design of deliberative democracy. Both are the highest level deliberative bodies of the state, representing the diverse interests of society, undertaking the functions of policy consultation and public opinion aggregation, and serving as a supplementary form of electoral democracy. They also have overlapping functions, as the People's Council of Kazakhstan has the right of legislative initiative, and the CPPCC can influence legislation through proposals and suggestions, both of which are institutionalized channels for social participation in national governance. In addition, both have broad representativeness with members covering all regions, industries, and groups, taking into account the voices of elites and the grassroots, reflecting the governance goal of extensive unity and consensus building. Thank you.
Professor Wang, thank you very much for your insightful analysis. Your perspective shows that the constitutional reform, goes beyond institutional change and helps strengthen our regional trust, including in China-Kazakhstan relations. Thank you again for joining us today.
Жандос Иванович, вы неоднократно упоминали, что Конституция — это не просто свод законов, но это еще и стратегическое высказывание. Это очень четкий сигнал для международного сообщества о ценностях Казахстана как государства. Мы уже упоминали это: человекоцентричность, экологическая ответственность, социальная солидарность. И мы предлагаем еще раз обсудить того, как это влияет на публичный образ Казахстана в международном пространстве. И к нам присоединились коллеги из Бельгии, из США. Джошуа Линкольн все еще на связи с нами. И мы хотели бы задать вопрос о том, как конституционная реформа позиционирует мягкую силу Казахстана как ответственного, предсказуемого партнера, который разделяет ценности, прежде всего, и стандарты развитого мира.
Я думаю, будет логично спросить это нашего бельгийского коллегу. Давайте обратимся к нему. And to explore this dimension of image, public diplomacy, and soft power, we are joined today by Dr. Oливье Арифон, expert and author of the TELUS think tank and a researcher at Côte d'Azur University. Dr. Arifon, welcome to the КИСИ Podcast, and we are delighted to have you with us. Let me begin with a broad question. In your view, how might the new Constitution of Kazakhstan influence the country's international image and its strategic narrative on the global stage?
Well, that's a perfect question for my competencies. That's totally right. I think that this reform will contribute to the image because the first element is the point that spontaneously arrived in my mind is that it reflects the country in two movements. The country is not blocked somewhere, but the government and your president and the rest of the administration is ready to move and to propose a new system, which will be with its internal specificities, but at least for the external audiences, I consider that it reflects clearly something which is first positive, and then also totally aligned with the rest of the public diplomacy approaches. An image is not only one topic. The image is totally composed of several components, and all these components create an image for one country. So this element is a part of it.
Thank you, Dr. Arifon. And Joshua, let me now bring you back to the discussion, because this normative dimension also intersects with the constitutional law. And the new draft constitution places strong emphasis on a human-centric approach, robust guarantees of human rights, as well as commitments to environmental responsibility, science, and innovation. From an international legal and comparative perspective, how do such progressive constitutional principles shape Kazakhstan's global image?
It's a really a very interesting and very current question from an international perspective. Principles like a human-centric approach, strong human rights guarantees, commitments to environmental responsibility, science, innovation, they function as primarily as signals. They tell the outside world how a state understands its place in contemporary global politics and its role in governance terms. So for a country like Kazakhstan, those signals matter a lot because international perception today is shaped less by ideology and a lot more by alignment around shared problem-solving agendas and shared values. If I'm going to cooperate with you, I want to know what kind of a person you are, what you think about some of the big questions in the world. I don't necessarily care which way you vote, but I might be curious about how where you stand on certain critical aspects of human rights, or the role of technology and science in social development. And so this is where the signaling happens. So human rights language, for example, places Kazakhstan within the mainstream of global constitutional discourses. It tells partners, it reassures partners that governance is oriented towards dignity, towards participation, towards inclusion, towards legal protection, even when there are disagreements and on specific issues, or there are problems of performance or practice or implementation. No country is free of those problems, but what countries want to know about one another is broadly what where their orientation is and what their posture is on these particular issues. So before countries engage in trade and education projects, in security cooperation and diplomacy, they want to know what these values are. And I would say the emphasis on environmental responsibility, on science, on innovation speaks to a slightly different but equally important audience. It aligns Kazakhstan with the defining challenges of this moment: climate transition, sustainable development, technological change, resilience. These are very different priorities, again, from 1995. These were not the issues that we were all worried about in 1995. For international institutions, for investors, for multilateral partners, this signals that a state is not only stable, but that it's forward-looking, that it understands the time that we live in. And it recognizes that economic competitiveness, that political legitimacy, increasingly depend on knowledge, on sustainability, on science, on adaptation. I think it's important to say this is not just rhetorical signaling. Again, this is going back to my image of the coat. This is not a fashion change. It reflects an evolution of Kazakhstan's foreign policy that is already well established. It's sometimes described as a blue and green foreign policy or blue and green diplomacy, because it integrates more and more some of these emerging issues: climate, water, emissions, renewables, biodiversity, pollution, transboundary resource management, into traditional fields of diplomacy. And certainly we have seen the country do that in recent years. It doesn't mean that it's a perfect record. It means that it is oriented towards these problems, towards these challenges. And other states recognize that, therefore, that it is facing the same reality and adopting roughly the same orientation in that. And that can give them confidence. So in that way, it's building on the country's long-standing multi-vector approach. But its approach to problem solving is shaped now also by environmental and technological realities. So at the same time, I think we should say international actors are not naive. As I was suggesting, constitutional languages, as I said it earlier, does not automatically translate into credibility. What it does is it set expectations. And I think this is important, the country to understand as well. Institutional behavior, real-world outcomes will be judged over time. When you say you believe in a thing, whether it is human rights or the value of sustainability, or the role of social liberties, or the important the growing importance of tech and digitization, then you must expect that others will take you seriously to that standard and will expect you to be making efforts towards that standard. So these principles enhance the country's, I think, standing as a responsible modern actor, but they also raise the level of scrutiny. They raise expectations. They say, yes, you can come and you can look at how we are performing in this area, in this area, in this area, because we have put it forward into our constitution. For a middle power, I think that is confident in its direction, this trade-off is usually seen less as a risk and more as an opportunity to show seriousness and to show maturity. And that itself is interesting from an outside perspective to observe in this current process. There is an evolving maturity, or a set of different questions that are now coming up for the country in this process at this particular moment in time.
Dr. Arifon, Joshua, thank you both for your insightful discussion, meaningful discussion. Your insights show that constitutional reform is not only about legal changes, but also about values, direction, and our long-term strategy. Principles like human rights, sustainability, and innovation shape how Kazakhstan is seen internationally. And thank you again for your time and expertise. It was a pleasure having you on the КИСИ Podcast.
Мы поговорили о стратегическом нарративе Казахстана. Теперь хотелось бы перейти к практическому измерению, потому что климатические обязательства Казахстана, экологическая ответственность, все это играет свою роль на восприятии Казахстана как ключевого игрока в энергетической сфере. И тут мы обратились к греческому эксперту международному в сфере энергетики, климатических изменений, Константиносу Геропулосу. Давайте послушаем его мнение.
Давайте послушаем. So, Konstantinos, welcome to the КИСИ Podcast. We are very pleased to have you with us, and let me begin with the environmental dimension. To what extent does the inclusion of the principle of environmental stewardship in the Constitution, in the new Constitution of Kazakhstan, enhance our country's ability to fulfill its climate commitments and strengthen its position in international cooperation on sustainable development?
First of all, thanks for having me. It is, just to start, it's a very important development. And as the president announced recently, there's going to be a nationwide referendum on March 15th. So already there is an increased citizen participation. And this is a very important step because it strengthens individual freedoms in the country of Kazakhstan. It also increases citizen participation, and it creates robust institutions in the country. This is very important because Kazakhstan is actually going to host an ecological summit in April, and with wide participation and also from its Central Asian neighbors. Transboundary river governance and collaboration is very important, especially because a lot of the rivers start in other countries, and so it's very important to collaborate and decide on the limited water resources. Another very important issue is the issue of the RLC. I've traveled a lot in the region and also in neighboring Azerbaijan, where they recently brought up the issue of the level of the Caspian Sea. I've actually experienced it, seeing it, that it has already been decreasing. So it's a very much important issue for humanity and for the Caspian Sea, and also the issue of the RLC to make it a little more. There is an area where they're going to try to reestablish the water resources, but the Caspian Sea is very important for the livelihood of all the neighboring littoral states. In that respect, this is established now in the institutional changes, and Tokaios, with his experience also in the UN, he can bring up this issue. I think they have already proposed establishing an international water organization. I think that was proposed last year, and this issue is going to, as I mentioned, will be discussed during the ecological summit. But the institutional changes provide a framework, and it's very important that they state this very important issue so that it becomes a government priority, but it also gives the guidelines to all the institutions to proceed with issues of water safety, security, cooperation and collaboration with neighboring states. And again, going back to the EU, they have welcomed this environmental aspect of the institutional changes.
Thank you, Konstantinos. And of course, this environmental perspective is one of the top priorities for our country's future development. And let me turn to the energy perspective. How might the constitutional prioritization of science, innovation, and sustainable development influence Kazakhstan's long-term energy strategy and its role in the global energy markets?
Thanks. Kazakhstan aims to position itself as an AI and logistics hubs, and especially connecting East and West. We've seen it the importance of the emerging importance of the middle corridor, again with which is going to be creating a pathway to Europe. And at the same time, it has developed and has been a host for all emerging technologies. These are also important for in the sense of renovation, but also it will help with the level of sustainability. Obviously, Kazakhstan is a major hydrocarbon producer, so oil and gas will remain a priority, but more ecological and more innovative ways of extracting those and transporting these in a more ecological way and reducing CO2 emissions is very important. But also for the development of renewables, it's still a small percentage of Kazakhstan energy production, but in the whole aspect of creating the green corridors to Europe, and also exporting, but also improving the quality of life and reducing emissions within the countries are very important. AI is being established in many different levels. We have, as in digitalization and artificial intelligence are reshaping global realities. Kazakhstan has accelerated global and digital production and adoption across all sectors of the economy, including energy.
Thank you, Konstantinos, for your comprehensive analysis. It was a pleasure having you today with us on our КИСИ Podcast. And thank you again. Я думаю, мы можем подвести итоги нашего третьего подкаста с зарубежными коллегами. И очень благодарен всем тем экспертам, которые подключились к нам для обсуждения очень важной, я думаю, можно сказать, исторической реформы, через которую проходит Казахстан. И наши зарубежные эксперты подчеркнули, что конституционная модернизация – это не только наша внутренняя трансформация институтов, это стратегический сигнал. Сигнал о зрелости политической системы, о готовности к ответственности, о стремлении к предсказуемости и долгосрочной устойчивости. Мы обсудили сегодня баланс национального и международного права, нашу новую институциональную политическую архитектуру, усиление парламентской роли, значение и влияние реформы на региональное доверие, а также экологические и энергетические аспекты этой большой реформы. Главный вывод, конечно же, очевиден. Модернизация укрепляет нашу субъектность, суверенность Казахстана, усиливает доверие международных партнеров и формирует более устойчивую модель развития в условиях большой глобальной турбулентности. Я хочу подчеркнуть, что КИСИ проводит целую серию больших экспертных мероприятий, в рамках которой мы обсуждаем и конституционную реформу, и ряд других наиболее значимых для нашей страны вопросов.
Благодарим вас, Жандос Шаймарданович, за то, что вы модерировали все эти дискуссии. Я уверена, что мы внесли свой вклад в разъяснение конституционной реформы именно сквозь призму международной экспертизы. И благодарим вас.
Большое спасибо.
Итак, мы завершаем серию КИСИ Podcast, посвященную международному восприятию конституционной реформы, проекту новой Конституции и предстоящему референдуму. В сегодняшнем выпуске мы постарались показать, как воспринимаются институциональные изменения в Казахстане на международной арене, в Китае, в США, в Европе, в экспертных и академических кругах. Вывод очевиден. Новая Конституция – это не только внутренний общественный диалог, но это часть глобального разговора о ценностях, устойчивом развитии и будущем государств. Спасибо, что были с нами. Подписывайтесь на КИСИ Podcast, ставьте лайки, делитесь выпуском с вашими друзьями и коллегами. КИСИ Podcast. Здесь говорят об актуальном и важном. До новых встреч!